are back. And if you're joining us now, we're just jumping into our first conversation, and we are getting an update from the Belize Peace Movement in relation to their redistricting case. And joining us for this first conversation, we have Hubert Enriquez, who is one of the claimants and the chair of legal affairs of the Legal Affairs Committee for the Belize Peace Movement. Good morning.
Good morning, Marlene, and good morning, colleague there. It's so good to be here this morning, and it's certainly a pleasure. I'm hoping that at some point our attorney, Mr. Saliba, will be able to join us. His process a little late, but in any event, I'm here, and I will be able to do my best to answer whatever questions you may pose.
Well, we're certainly glad to have you here. And perhaps just for the benefit of some of our viewers, we can just start by, you can perhaps give a brief summary of the redistricting case and just a little bit about where we are now in terms of the stage of progress of the case.
Well, certainly. Well, this case really and truly has been going on for quite a while. Yes. In fact, when I say quite a while, one has to mention that in 2015, there was an effort by pretty much the same persons that are now involved to have the case tried. And in fact, we went to court, and if it wasn't for there were some difficulties with our attorney at the time, but the case was lodged. It's case number 42 of 2015. And we had difficulty with the attorney at that point in time, but the case was registered and everything. And so this last year, we again lodged a case after really writing letters to the attorney, to the Election Boundaries Department or Commission, pointing out to them that in fact there was a case that was actually filed and that we are following up on the case because it hadn't been resolved yet. Yeah. We had no responses. And so we decided, in fact, we were going to file another case. And this was done sometime last year, in October last year. Yeah. The case was refiled again. But since then, there have been several ups and downs. You know, there was a pandemic this year early. There was also the fact that the Chief Justice had demitted office. These are all setbacks we had in our case. And so we're at the point now where over a year has actually gone. But the issues remain the same. That is to say that even at this point, we haven't had the matter resolved. And so we are once again pursuing this matter. The case basically centers around the fact that the government and the Election and Boundaries Commission has refused to comply with the Constitution as it relates to the proportionality of constituencies, by which I mean that the Constitution requires that all constituencies in terms of voters shall be nearly as equal in terms of the amount of voters. And we have a situation where there are several constituencies, notably in the Belize City area, not meaning to target Belize City, that are what we say malapportioned. In other words, the amount of voters in those constituencies are far, far less than voters that are, say, in Stan Creek West, in Toledo, in certain in Belmont where I live. So we feel that, in fact, it's a shame that we've had to go through this process to ensure that we get what is required in the Constitution. It shouldn't be at all that the citizens have to do this to get their rights. That's where we find ourselves. Yeah. So the case is basically about that matter, ensuring that in fact the provisions of the Constitution is complied with as it relates to the proportionality of votes and equality of votes in various constituencies. So we are where we are right now, and we are at the point now where we are about to receive a report of an expert. Now, at the last hearing that we held, which was around the 27th of July, Madam Chief Justice Michelle Arana had in fact granted permission of the interested party. Now you'll know that there are claimants, which is ourselves, 10 persons, ourselves, and then there is an interested party, represented by Mr. Ashcroft and his attorney. Now, the interested party had requested that an expert be appointed to look at this whole matter of the redistricting, and as a result of the discussions and arguments at the court level, the court had declared that, in fact, the interested party ought to be, or ought to be granted permission to be involved in the case. In fact, I have in front of me, if I may do so, just to read quickly what was actually granted by the Chief Justice. It was really a grant to arrange for the expert identified by the court from the panel of independent experts. So there was a panel of independent experts. There were 3 experts that were identified by the independent by the interested party, and the Chief Justice agreed that they were going to actually give permission for 1 expert to be appointed. And the second thing really was that the court also stated that the expert ought to also be entitled, or he was actually given permission to get documents or data from the government as is required for him to do his work. And so those were the orders of the court. But looking at it in more detail, what we will see is that what it comes down to is that there were 3, I would say, components of the court order. One, that the expert would gather information, the most recent data which was available from the Election and Boundaries Department. They would analyze that data, and then he was also to prepare a report offering his objective view on whether or not the constituencies, as it is at the moment, are significantly equal. Then, therefore, the expert was also to identify international standards of democracy and to express an opinion of whether or not what we have in Belize in terms of our constituencies are in fact more or less in line with international standards, and then to make suggestions on the redrawing of maps. So this is very interesting. So what they have been asked to do, basically, the experts have been asked to do, is to make a suggestion as to where these boundaries are to be. And so those are basically what has happened. And the report of the expert will be submitted to the court. Not going to go to the party, it's going to go to the court.
That's where we are now.
From there, we're going to decide how we're going to move forward. That's where we are.
Now, I wanted to get a bit more information there, because we've heard both the BPM and the attorney for BPM speak about this quite often, and there are clear examples that can be used, as you noted already, Stann Creek West versus an area like Fort George, where you can see that there is a great difference between the value of each individual vote and the representation that comes from that. So I want to ask, what are you expecting in terms of the depth or the difference that in information that will come out from this expert's report?
Well, first of all, the expert chosen, Mr. Sean Trent, has quite a bit of experience in this whole matter. Yeah. And he has done this exercise several times. In fact, as you may have seen from the release we made, he has extensive experience in this whole issue. In the matter, he's lecturer at the university. He does international. He has international engagement on this matter, and so we believe that given his experience as well as his qualifications, he will be able to guide us in terms of what is necessary and how we have to look at this whole matter. It isn't simply a matter of just looking at the proportionality based on what we see from the documents that are submitted to us, but there's also the question of looking at the geographic location of voters, how they are affected by having to be transported. Like for instance, we know that in Fort George, it'd be much easier for those voters there to go to a polling station as opposed to, let's say, say the kind of South area, which has a difference of about 50 miles in radius. So the access to polling stations is an issue which he is going to actually look at, and I know that based on the information he has sought and gotten, that he's able to determine that whether or not in fact that situation is a desirable one. And so there are things that are going to come out of it which we will learn from, and we are certainly anticipating and looking forward to his report with much interest and enthusiasm.
So it's also looking deeper at the effects that this malapportionment has caused on persons who are in a constituency that is much larger than the smaller ones.
And the thing with Marlene is that we are so disappointed that the government or its agents are unable to appreciate if this kind of exercise to happen, given the fact that we know that they have the documents, and that we know that they have had similar reports that we've had, and yet they have not been able to come to their senses to be able to realize that this has to happen. And so we are disappointed, but yet sometimes it is that one has to take up the things on his own shoulder to get what he wants in life, and so that's what we're glad to do.
We also have joining us now Arthur Saldivar, who is the attorney at law for the Belize Peace Movement in the matter. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Yes. Yeah, thanks for joining us now. And if we just continue off of what you just said, I think that another thing or another aspect, or which is the fundamental aspect, I suppose, of this case is that it's not only is it something that should be done, but it's the exercise is really required by the Constitution. So I think what is perhaps on people's mind is, well, what are the consequences going to be if they fail then to carry out what is required of them?
Well, the long and short of it is this. The Constitution requires that the constituencies be as equal as possible. The Constitution also requires that once the Supreme Court has the remit of a matter involving the fundamental rights and freedom of the individual, that the court would address that situation irrespective of what may be coming thereafter. It has to be given the utmost importance in terms of its consideration for discharge. That said, you cannot have a constitutional election with an unconstitutional state of affairs as it relates to the constituencies. So the short answer is that the election would not be valid if it is held without this being addressed first in the courts.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to come back to because you're right, it is in the Constitution. This has been a conversation that has taken place within the public quite a few times. There were some who said the redistricting could have been done along with the re-registration. Of course, the final thought was that the re-registration had to be done first. That has been completed. Yes. I venture to say that we really haven't heard any political leader say that it isn't necessary. The question is the timing, and I want to tap into that. We are over a month away from what will most likely be the election. What does that mean for this case?
What it means, again, the truth of the matter is that we are 4 or 5 months away from when the Constitution ultimately requires an election to be held, not a month. The government has 90 days after the due date within which an election can be called. So, where this matter is now before the court, it has to be given precedence in the sense that this is not something that was just brought to court yesterday or the day before. It's been in court since last year. The delays that has taken place has nothing to do with the claimants, but everything to do with how the process works. Remember, we changed the Chief Justice since this matter was brought. It was brought before Chief Justice Benjamin. And since then, he has left that position, and we have a new Chief Justice now. So that was one of the delays in this matter. Mm-hmm. So it has been no fault of the claimant that the matter has been delayed. In this most recent situation, in terms of the expert and the expert being able to do what he was commissioned to do, those delays were brought about because the government agencies were not cooperative. However, it is my understanding that that report now is finished. It's now complete. And given that situation, the emergency period within which an election may be called can be invoked. Because this exercise will not take that long, as you have rightly said. The re-registration has already been complete, so we know where the voters are in terms of the numbers, and a redrawing of the election boundaries for the constituencies will not take an inordinately long period of time. 2 to 3 weeks. In fact, it has been done in Australia in less than a month. And we're talking about millions of people in constituencies, as opposed to the thousands in ours.
Bear in mind too, I thought that in fact there are suggestions already about the maps being drawn already. And so I believe that a lot of time that will be taken ordinarily will be cut down because the expert has done quite a bit of work. And in fact, he has proposed certain maps already. In fact, that's part of his remit. And so it's all a matter of going through the suggestions now and agreeing to it, and then and submitting it for approval by the Parliament eventually.
No.
So quite a bit of work has been done already.
Yeah, and that's an important part to explore further. When we hear redistricting, we don't know what that entails. Is it a simple paper exercise? How do you inform voters of whether or not they've changed to a new constituency? If you're going to create new areas, new constituencies, what do you envision, or what do you see as your ultimate goal?
The ultimate goal is to ensure that the Constitution is adhered to and respected the way it should be. We're either a constitutional democracy or we're not. And if we're not a constitutional democracy, then we're a farce, a fraud as a nation. And I certainly don't want to believe that Belize and Belizeans would envision being a part of fraud. So if we're not, then we must follow the Constitution. And what that means is that we must, the prominence it should have in terms of being adhered to. In this particular case, we're talking about ensuring that there is no voter discrimination in Belize, which means that the same number of people, as much as possible, would be electing the same number of representatives in each area. We cannot have an area where there's 1,500 voters electing one representative and another area with 10,000 also electing only one representative. That disparity is unfair, it is unjust, it is unconstitutional. So in that regard, where there's certainly a need to divide those areas to have them be as equal as they can to the ones with the 1,005, or to combine those with 1,005 to make them more equal to those with the 10,000. One out of two things has to happen, but we cannot go forward with the status quo.
But I want to point out as well, Barata, or to our listeners, that in fact there was quite a good article written over the weekend by one Jerry Enriquez, and he made quite very good observations. And in fact, what he did say was that there were several matters to be contended with here. For instance, he pointed out that in fact, this exercise also affects the way in which policy is made, because it has to do with the amount of persons who are appointed to cabinet, so that what he observed and what everybody can see is because there are more persons, for instance, in Belize City, is a disproportionate amount of persons in Belize City, then that is reflected in the cabinet, and so that therefore the principal policy-making agency of government is skewed towards those persons in cabinet who happen proportionately more from Belize City, and so that is quite an extraordinary.
It goes back to.
It has to be corrected because it affects policymaking as well. No?
It goes
as
back
well
to
as matter of distribution of resources and so many things are affected, and so it has to be the case that it has to be done with the urgency that it requires.
Well, I want to just jump a little bit off of Marlene's earlier question, just dealing with the issue of time. And Arthur, you had, of course, pointed out that we are a few months away from when is the actual constitutionally mandated deadline. But just for argument's sake, let's say that an election date is called and it is sometime, in November in the next coming weeks. Where does that leave the case, and what options will the BPM have to move their matter forward?
Well, as a part of the claim that was lodged before the court, one of the remedies sought was to have an injunction be placed against the election and boundaries in respect of them holding any election before this matter has been ventilated. That injunction would be then lodged once a date is announced. And we expect that the court would then take into consideration all it has before it in terms of the expert's report and the timeline within which the expert is saying that this constitutional process can be done. Again, it would be obtuse for the court to rule again. Well, let me not go there, but simply to say this, that the Constitution has to be given its due respect in this regard, and I believe that is something that will weigh heavily on the court in considering the injunction. The time certainly is not a factor because, as I said, it's been done in large trees with larger numbers of people in quite a short time. It has not received the kind of notoriety that some in Belize may want to think and attach to this, because again, it's about serving the people and about ensuring that the people are given every opportunity to get the right representation, the proper representation that they require. And if it is that any party out there is suggesting that this cannot be done, then it's obvious that they are not for the people and they don't wish to serve the people, but rather to serve themselves.
But just to follow up on that, Brother Arthur, listeners, I do believe indeed that, let us say, given the worst case scenario or the best case scenario where the court orders that in fact the exercise must be done, and it means that certain divisions will be redivided in such a way that they are now in compliance with the Constitution. It then means that for certain representatives, perhaps let us say the smaller ones, they will now have to canvass extra persons in their constituencies. Yeah. And perhaps it might be justified because they would have traditionally been benefited from the fact that they have not been doing so. And so that even in the case where that will be required, then to be that they will just now begin to do a work that they should be a person have been doing for all the while. And so in some sense, it would be justifiable. There is a question about that now, and there is a feeling that perhaps it would be unfair for them for the court to be asking them to do extra work now, but really and truly they have been benefited all those years. Yeah. But the bigger picture here, though, is what's going to happen if, for instance, the matter is put off until next elections. Mm-hmm. It means then that those persons and those constituencies will continue to suffer for the next 5 years. And so when we weigh both situations where there might be a temporary inconvenience of persons who are now running to be able to reach out to our constituent members, as opposed to the loss or the disadvantage that those persons who are now affected by this exercise will have to go through for the next 5 years, then clearly it must fall in the favor of those persons, of people who are in constituencies who are malapportioned.
Yeah, yeah. You know, when you explain or when you look deeper into how this has affected people and affected the overall policymaking of the country for years, it is easy to understand. But I think people have also adjusted to this is what it is. If you were talking to a member in one of the larger constituencies, what would you say to them about how their everyday life has been affected by the fact that they don't have equal representation in the House? What difference has it made in their life?
Well, it has basically subjected them to a situation where the resources of the nation, in terms of how it's been directed and allocated, has been denied them. They can look at their streets, they can look at the condition of their schools, they can look at their healthcare facilities and the lack thereof in their area, and recognize that the reason why they don't have the kind of amenities the other areas have is because of this voter discrimination that exists, because their vote is not as important as the vote in these smaller constituencies. So they are more expendable, and as a result of that, they are placed lower down on the totem pole of priorities when it relates to the allocation of government resources. So in that regard, yes, they will be able to see that readily. In fact, we have areas in Bomapan where the streets are so deplorable, like Mayamopan, Salvapan, San Martin, Rivera, that you wonder, these people are living in the capital of the country, but they're still not being served the way they should be because of this particular problem. The voter discrimination that has taken place, they are not seen as important as the persons in Fort George, the persons in Albert, the persons in Caribbean Shores, or the persons in Queen Square. And as a result of that, I do believe that those persons in the larger constituencies recognize this as a major problem and certainly would want to have it changed.
And I think simple math as well. If you divvy up what 4,000 is amongst 1,000 people versus 10,000, it's a very easy picture to understand.
Oh, certainly.
But let's allow me here, because I understand that political will has or should have no impact on what our Constitution states. But the political will is what drives a lot of our policy making. It is very unlikely that that the current administration will want to proceed with a redistricting case before the next election. They've done their groundwork. They've done their campaigning. They know who their voters are. They probably had them registered. And in fact, to be able to change the makeup of any constituency, it's not something that they would want to do in earnest. So I think it could be a possibility that this case will be fought to the very end. Does the Belize Peace Movement have the wherewithal? Are you going to take this as far as it? I mean, you say that if they call elections, you'll file for an injunction. How far are you willing to take this, and how will you even find the resources to be able to push this all the way through to the highest court if needs be?
Well, where is a will, there's a way, Marlene, and as I said, we are fighting this to the very end. Here's the thing, right? And you touched on the most important aspect of this entire situation, the political will. We have to appreciate that our politicians, whether it be PUP or UDP, they run in a parallel system to our constitution. They are not governed by our constitution. The political parties are not subjected to the provisions of the Constitution of Belize. As a result, they don't respect it. And this is basically where the corruption lies, because these political parties are independent entities running under their own set of laws and their own set of rules. This is totally to the detriment of the Belizean people, and as a result, they have only used the Belizean people and elections as a matter of convenience. This can no longer be countenanced. We have to reassert ourselves as a constitutional democracy, bringing everybody under the rule of law, including the politicians, because this is not about the politicians, it's about the people of Belize. And where we go now into the next 39 years. We've been 39 years going backwards. It's time to put a stop to it now and start moving forward the right way.
And there's absolutely no compromise of saying,
none.
We'll do this after the next election.
Not
First
from the
thing
business
on the priority list.
Not at all.
Must be before. According to your position, you're saying it must be before the next general election.
The buck stops here, the buck stops now. It's time for us to be a constitutional democracy, not this 5-year farce we've been having for the past 39 years.
All right. So the expert presents his report when?
The expert report is prepared. The court has to make a determination when we come back in terms of a date. I need to get back into Belize. I'm waiting for, well, I won't be repatriated. I'm waiting for the repatriation to die a natural death so I can come back.
All right. So we understand that would be the next step before the courts, and then we'll see what happens from there.
Yes.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you for providing that update to us this morning. And of course, we will keep on following this case. Stay safe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Bye.
All right. And from talking about redistricting of the country to having NGOs get online with the NGO directory and getting their status up to date. That's coming up after the break. Please stay tuned.